Picture a village in central Germany in 1635. A year ago, it had 200 people. Farmers, blacksmiths, a priest, children. It had a church, a market, homes that families had lived in for generations. Now the church is a ruin. Half the houses are burned. The fields have not been planted in 2 years. The survivors, perhaps 40 people, are eating bark and leather. 3 armies have passed through in the past 12 months. A Swedish army, an imperial army, and a mercenary force that didn't belong to anyone in particular. All 3 took everything. The priest is dead. Most of the children are dead. The village does not have a name anymore because no one is left who remembers it. This was not an exceptional story in Germany between 1618 and 1648. It was a Tuesday. The 30 Years' War is one of the most catastrophic events in European history and one of the least known. It killed somewhere between 8 and 12 million people, possibly a third of the population of the German territories. It destroyed entire regions so completely that they took a century to recover. It started as a religious dispute. It became something far more complicated and far more brutal. And it ended by inventing the modern world. To understand the 30 Years' War, you have to understand what Europe looked like in 1618. The continent was a patchwork of competing powers held together loosely by the Holy Roman Empire. The name was famously mocked by the philosopher Voltaire, who noted that it was neither holy nor Roman, nor an empire. He had a point. The Holy Roman Empire was more of a political concept than a functioning state. A collection of several hundred kingdoms, duchies, free cities, and ecclesiastical territories that nominally owed allegiance to an elected emperor, who in practice had limited power over any of them. The dominant family was the Habsburgs, who had held the imperial title almost continuously since the 15th century. Habsburg lands stretched across Austria, Bohemia, Hungary, Spain, the Spanish Netherlands, and territories in Italy and the New World. They were Catholic, they were powerful, and they were increasingly determined to use both the imperial title and the Counter-Reformation to reassert Catholic dominance over a continent that the Protestant Reformation had dramatically changed. The Reformation had split Europe along religious lines that had hardened over the previous century. Germany itself was a patchwork, some territories Lutheran, some Calvinist, some Catholic, with the religion of each territory determined under the Peace of Augsburg of 1555 by the religion of its ruler. This arrangement was uneasy and increasingly contested. Underneath the religious tension was a structural power struggle. The German Protestant princes wanted autonomy. The Habsburg emperors wanted centralization. The kings of France, Catholic, but terrified of being surrounded by Habsburg power, were quietly supporting the Protestant side. The Dutch Republic, locked in its own long struggle for independence from Spanish Habsburg rule, was another complicating factor. It was a Europe of overlapping interests, mutual suspicions, religious passions, and dynastic rivalries. A single spark would be enough. In May 1618, a group of Protestant Bohemian nobles marched into Prague Castle and confronted the Catholic Habsburg governors who had been imposing restrictions on Protestant worship. The confrontation escalated rapidly. The Protestants threw 3 royal officials out of a 3rd-story window, a drop of roughly 70 feet. All 3 survived, landing in a pile of refuse and dung. Catholics immediately declared it a miracle. Protestants pointed out that God had given them a pile of garbage to land in. The incident became known as the Defenestration of Prague, and it set Europe ablaze. Bohemia formally deposed the Habsburg king and offered the crown to Frederick V, the Calvinist Elector Palatine, a young and not particularly capable prince. His acceptance of the crown would drag much of Protestant Germany into the conflict. Frederick V is remembered in history as the Winter King. He held Bohemia for one winter before the Habsburg forces crushed him at the Battle of White Mountain in November 1620. It was a complete and devastating Catholic victory. Frederick fled into exile. The Bohemian Protestant nobility was crushed, executed, exiled, or forced to convert. Bohemia was re-Catholicized by force. This should have been the end of the war. The Habsburgs had won decisively. Instead, it was only the beginning. The 30 Years' War is typically divided into 4 phases: Bohemian, Danish, Swedish, and French. And this division reveals something important. As the war progressed, the original religious motivation was increasingly buried under layers of strategic calculation that had nothing to do with God. Denmark entered the war in 1625, supposedly to defend the Protestant cause. In reality, King Christian IV saw an opportunity to expand Danish influence in northern Germany and control the Baltic trade routes. His campaign was a disaster. The Habsburg general Albrecht von Wallenstein crushed the Danish forces. Denmark withdrew from the war. Sweden entered in 1630 under King Gustavus Adolphus. Sweden's motivation was more ideological. Gustavus Adolphus believed the Protestant cause in Germany was being destroyed, and he had a brilliant army. He won a series of extraordinary victories and transformed the war. Then, Gustavus Adolphus was killed at the Battle of Lutzen in 1632. Sweden stayed in the war, not for religion anymore, but for territory. Then France entered. France was ruled by Cardinal Richelieu. He was Catholic. His king was Catholic. But Richelieu's goal was to break Habsburg power. So France funded Protestant armies against a Catholic emperor, a Catholic cardinal paying Lutheran armies to fight Catholics. By the final decade, religion had largely disappeared as the real driver of the war. Armies fought for territory, survival, and pay. Mercenaries switched sides depending on who offered money. The human cost is almost impossible to comprehend. The German territories lost between 1/4 and 1/3 of their entire population. Armies were not just military forces. They were moving systems of destruction that consumed everything in their path. When supplies ran out, they lived off the land. Villages were stripped bare, crops destroyed, livestock taken. Entire regions collapsed into famine. Mercenary armies were especially brutal. When their contracts ended, they simply survived by plundering whoever remained. The sack of Magdeburg in 1631 became a symbol of total destruction. Around 20,000 civilians were killed. The city was burned almost completely to the ground. The word Magdeburg became a verb meaning total annihilation. Plague followed the armies. Typhus, dysentery, and bubonic plague killed as many as combat did. Farmers stopped planting because survival was uncertain. Famine followed. Some regions lost more than half their population. Entire landscapes reverted to forest. The war ended in 1648 with the Peace of Westphalia, signed in Münster and Osnabrück. The negotiations themselves took years and continued while fighting still happened. It was one of the first true international peace conferences. Westphalia established the principle of state sovereignty, that rulers govern their own territories without external interference. It limited the power of both the Holy Roman Emperor and the Pope. It also formalized a fragile form of religious tolerance, allowing rulers to determine the religion of their state while permitting limited private worship. It redrew the map of Europe and created the foundations of modern international relations: sovereign states, diplomacy, treaties, and mutual recognition. The era of religious wars in Europe effectively ended, not because belief disappeared, but because the cost of belief-driven war became unbearable. 30 years, 8 to 12 million dead, entire regions erased. It began with men thrown from a window and ended with a treaty that created the rules the world still follows. Too many sides, too many betrayals, too many causes. But that is precisely why it matters. Because wars never stay what they start as. Because civilians always pay the price that kings agree to. Some things never change. Black Atlas, history leaves clues. We follow them.